Good morning and welcome to the Denver Gazette Sports Podcast. I am your host, Chris Schmedeke. It is Monday morning, so we are reacting to the Broncos' 26-7 win, which no one on this podcast predicted. I'm of course joined by Chris Thomason live from Tampa Bay, getting ready to head to West Virginia. Chris, how are you today?
Hey, great to be here. Yeah, we'll be talking plenty about that dominant Broncos win. A little bit better than week 3 last year with the 70-20 loss in Miami.
And we're also joined by Kyle Fredrickson, who also got the joy of getting up early this morning and talking to Sean Payton at 6:30 in the morning.
Yeah, I can't be out there in Tampa, but to get a little bit of post-game reaction from Sean was interesting. I mean, that was it felt like a real momentum shifter, maybe long-term implications, but I don't know. This NFL business is tricky. We'll see if the Broncos can maintain it.
All right, so let's go ahead and dive into this. Like I said, 26-7 win. Broncos came out aggressive from the start. We had in today's Denver Gazette about how Sean Payton took the ball when they won the toss. And so, Chris, I'll start with you. It seemed like the game plan was to be aggressive no matter what yesterday.
Yeah, Sean Payton obviously was champing at the bit to get the ball first, and he probably was going to because if they win the toss, they receive, and then if the Bucs had won the toss, they probably would defer like most coaches did. And their plan was just to come out throwing right out of the gates. So much for all this conservative stuff that they had in the first two games, and it worked. On the first drive, Bo Nix was 4 of 4 for 70 yards, completed a pass on the first play to Cortland Sutton for 22 yards, later hit Josh Reynolds for 31 yards, and then scored on a 3-yard touchdown run for a 7-0 lead by the Broncos. And they were off and running after that.
So, Kyle, here's my question. Where was this the first 2 weeks?
It's a great question. I think the answer is that Sean Payton read Friday Face-Off, and I think he took your side, Schmedeke. I think he saw the lack of big plays because that was it. I mean, Chris Thomason mentioned it, but they attacked the field deep right away. And if you're the Buccaneers, that's maybe the last thing you expected after watching this Broncos after the first 2 weeks. And let's be honest, when we talk about this entire offense, everything they did well, it starts up front with that offensive line. I don't know where this group was over the first 2 weeks, but they really found something. And it's even more impressive when Mike McGlinchey's not out there. Alex Palczewski making his very first start. CT had a great story on him, his development in the Gazette leading up to the game, which was good timing because the way they were able to keep Nix clean was really impressive in that game. But I will say Nix bailed them out a few times with the way that he was able to escape the rush. He turned a nothing play into a first down multiple times in that game. So it's a little bit of everything, to get back to your question. Seems like it's just the culmination of a team figuring out its identity through 2 weeks, and then in week 3, really executing who they think they're going to be.
Yeah, that's an interesting point because it feels like maybe there was just that feeling out process, Chris, a little bit these first 2 weeks, and now it's like this is what Bo Nix can do. Now they've talked about Bo Nix being able to do this no matter what, and I think yesterday was the first time where he really. They keep talking about how calm and cool he's been through the first 3 weeks, but yesterday he really seemed confident back there.
Yeah, it was the first game that they really took the training wheels off Bo Nix, and he kind of started to look like the guy that they believe he can become and the guy that he looked in the preseason, albeit that was mostly against backups. But Sean Payton, I mean, he coached in the NFC South before. He knows Todd Bowles' his defense. He was familiar with going to Tampa Bay. I mean, he'd coached there as a head coach with New Orleans 15 times before. So that comfort level, he looked at it and he thought that he could dissect the Buccaneers defense. And granted, they were without star safety Antoine Winfield. Vita Vea, their rugged nose tackle, was ruled out as well. So those injuries helped the Broncos' cause, and they just took off from the start. And yeah, they probably could have scored some more points. They settled for 4 Will Lutz field goals, but after the first 2 performances of the season, you can't really complain too much.
You mentioned injuries on Tampa Bay. Any updates on Bronco injuries from this morning, Chris?
No, we didn't really hear anything. I mean, it seems to be, fairly clean game. I don't think anybody got hurt too badly.
All right, Kyle, I want to ask you about Cortland Sutton because our colleague Mark Kisler wrote a column about how the Broncos need to trade him. He had his, best game of the season. How good was it to see him get involved?
It was good, right? Because going into the year, when you looked at this Broncos offense on paper, the one guy that you saw who could really maybe be that player that opposing defensive coordinators have to plan for, the guy who could take over a game with a few big plays, and that's Cortland Sutton. And without that vertical passing game through the first 2 weeks, I kind of see where Kiz was coming from. It's like, why do you need this guy if this isn't what your offense looks like? And at the same point, Cortland Sutton is a leader in this room, right? He's been a captain, I think, 4 years in a row. So there's a lot of trust in what he does for this team. And we saw him do that. And with Cortland and the rest of this group, what was also most encouraging for me was the yards after the catch, right? I mean, we talked about it on this podcast. It felt like those receivers were catching passes and down immediately. So to see a little bit of that explosion was big. And even from the very first series, right? Chris touched on it before, but that was 4 passes and 2 quarterback runs, and the Broncos scored a touchdown. And, that was getting the ball deep. Josh Reynolds and that timing route over his shoulder, that was a beautiful throw by Bo. So just a lot of things working for this group to make it happen.
And Chris, has little Jordan Humphrey become Bo Nix's security blanket a little bit?
Yeah, he had a nice game yesterday. 6 catches for 37 yards. He's bounced back well after the one ugly drop he had in the opener at Seattle. But really, he's also Sean Payton's security blanket. I mean, basically 5 out of his 6 years he's played, he's had little Jordan Humphrey, and they just move him up and down from the practice squad. And they know the little Jordan's not going anywhere. And so now he's back on the 53-man roster. He got into all 17 games last year. So unless he gets hurt, he'll get into all 17 this year. And, a steady guy. And he showed it on Sunday.
Yeah, he had a big third down reception, just to add to that, on that third down drive where they melted the clock.
Yeah.
He had a huge play on that drive, and that was key to the game, right? I mean, I haven't seen a Broncos team just melt a clock with a big lead in what feels like forever. And that's what winning teams do. So, credit to LJ for making that play and having the humility to, be a practice squad guy when you kind of maybe know that your role in the offense is a little bigger. He played as many snaps as Cortland Sutton on Sunday.
And that drive started at what, their own 6, I believe?
Mm-hmm. Right.
Yeah, so that was so let's talk running game, Kyle. So much debate about how this guy's name is pronounced if you watch the broadcast. So is it Bidet? Is that what they're going with in the media guide now?
So basically during the game, the in-house public address announcer, said Bidet, and then people were wondering, like, isn't it Batty? And then a team official said they had checked with Tyler, and it is indeed Bidet, not Batty, which everybody's pretty much been calling him since 2022 when he joined the team on the practice squad. But he wasn't available for any interviews after the game yesterday. But Jaleel McLaughlin said that he'll answer to anything that you call him, and he won't be upset if you call him Batty.
So Kyle, I mean, how does he start getting more? He had 9 carries for 70 yards. He had that one big run. Broncos ran the ball for just under 5 yards a carry yesterday. You look at the other 2 backs, Javonte 5 for 12, yikes. Jaleel McLaughlin 5 for 7, yikes. So I mean, is Bidet does he become more of the guy?
Yeah, I mean, I think the split in this rotation, however it settles out, it's going to start to shift in his favor, right? And I think listening to Sean Payton's comments, like they're not going to have just one guy who's going to handle the workload. It's going to be some sort of split. But I mean, you watch these games, Tyler, I'll just call him Tyler because I don't know how to say his last name yet. I'll wait and ask him later. He's the only guy who gets to the second level, right? Yeah. He's the only running back who seems to explode past the line of scrimmage. And, you have to have that element to your offense. And, I still think that there's something there with Jaleel McLaughlin, a kind of a hidden gem of that game. His first touchdown, it was kind of a no, 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 yes play,
Oh yeah.
right? Because he's taking it to the outside, he's using his speed. The decision on Sean Payton's part, I think he goes on a pitch play on third down in the red zone, which is a little bit risky. Teams are maybe expecting that vertical run. But with the speed that Jaleel has, he gets around that edge, scores that first touchdown for the Broncos. So I think, there's a lot of different skills these guys bring, but Tyler's the only guy with the explosion. He's got to start getting more looks, I think. Also with what he does in the passing game. This guy has caught passes in the flat and has exploded in space as well. So we'll see what happens. I think Marvin Mims got more looks and more snaps in this game as well, if I'm not mistaken. So maybe the Broncos are figuring out how to use these speed guys more. But right now, Tyler's the best thing the Broncos have going at running back.
Well, and Troy Franklin got on the field yesterday too,
Mm-hmm.
which
Right,
was
and that's great to see. No explosive plays. I think there was several targets, but the Broncos want to get him involved.
all right, Chris. Let's switch to the defense, which probably played its most complete game of the season. They've been pretty good all year, but let's start with Vance Joseph. I mean, if you go back a year, people said he was going to get fired. Now he seems to have his defense playing great. So what has changed with Vance Joseph and the Broncos defense?
Well, for starters, they're more comfortable now. It's a second year in Vance Joseph's system, and that's helped a lot. And so far, the guys that they lost, it hasn't been a big deal. I mean, people made a lot of Justin Simmons departing, but Brandon Jones has been really solid so far. I mean, had the big interception yesterday, so he's filling in well at safety. PJ Locke is stepping up and being more of a leader. At inside linebacker, they lose Josie Jewell, but Cody Barton and the new fellow, Christian Welch from Green Bay, have filled in okay. And the defensive line is improved. John Franklin Myers didn't play a ton of snaps yesterday as he's coming back from his concussion, but he gets his first sack of the season. Malcolm Roach has been a valuable addition, and Zach Allen, has talked about feeling more comfortable in year two, so he's stepped up. So, it's impressive the job that they've done on defense so far this season, despite having some injuries. I mean, Baron Browning is out and that sort of thing, and it's impressive, and they've got some depth there. They've been able to rotate guys in, so even if they have some more injuries, it looks like it's something they can withstand.
And Kyle, how happy do you think this defense was to play with a lead?
Oh yeah, I mean it's huge, right? And that was the thing. It was like the whole formula of how to win in the NFL. Finally, the Broncos figured it out, right? Like they ran the ball late when they had to. They had explosive plays early. They scored points off of turnovers. And yeah, I think that's a fair point to make about playing with the lead, because this is a defense that's always under stress, right? Like even when they're playing well, like there's the pressure. They need the takeaway. They have to be the ones who lead. And I'll say, without the way they played, maybe, without a turnover or two that they create, this is a whole different conversation that we're having this morning. Because, as well as Bo Nix played, he still didn't throw a touchdown pass. They still didn't establish the run consistently until the fourth quarter. But when you play great defense, all that stuff goes away. Your offense doesn't have to be perfect when you have an elite defense. And I would say after 3 weeks, it's safe to say this group is pretty elite. Chris touched on all the injuries. I think in previous years that the Broncos had all of that attrition, the quality of depth might not have been there to where they would feel so comfortable, rolling these guys out and having success. So to see Jonah Ellis, continue to be productive, Zach Allen blossom into his contract to where he's actually that guy on the defensive line. A lot of things going right. And the Baron Browning thing is tough, at least 4 games on IR, but it doesn't seem like it's going to be a problem for this team with the amount of quality depth that it has.
Well, and Chris, did they find a gem here in DeAndre Tillman?
Yeah, that was an intriguing signing during the offseason. He had played 3 years in the spring league with Birmingham Stallions, and there was some definite interest in him. And then he doesn't initially make the team and goes through waivers, and they're fortunate that nobody claimed him. And so you're thinking, okay, this is just a guy that's going to hang out in the practice squad all year. And then Baron Browning gets hurt. I mean, he's on IR. He's out at least 4 games. I'm not sure if it might be more. And boom, he gets promoted to the active roster. And I mean, I asked Sean Payton about him today, and they had confidence in him from the get-go. They love his play on special teams, and they thought that he could contribute immediately on defense, which he did. 20 snaps against the Bucs, 2 sacks, and they've got pretty interesting depth now at outside linebacker. I mean, you have Jonathan Cooper and Nick Benito both had sacks also yesterday. The team had 7 overall. And then you had Tillman getting 2, and then Jonah Ellis, as Kyle mentioned. So they got 4 sacks out of their outside linebackers on Sunday.
Kyle, you wrote a story about Patrick Surtain, who kind of bounced back. Mike Evans was absent in that whole game. But I want to ask you about the secondary as a whole. Riley Moss has kind of taken over that other spot, played well. Jaquan McMillan is just, I don't know, like from the time he got in the lineup last year, he's made plays. Like, the secondary was a worry because, like we talked about, Justin Simmons left. They didn't know who was playing against Surtain, but they have held up great in the first 3 games.
Yeah. I mean, basically no busts, right? Like I'd have to go back through the film and watch, but I don't remember very many plays where you're like, whoa, that guy's out of position, or oh man, he got beat badly. To this point, the Broncos have played with some quality wide receivers. I mean, every team in the NFL usually has one elite guy. But the way that Surtain is playing, I mean, he's backing up his all-pro status. You mentioned the bounce back. I wrote about it. Against the Steelers, it wasn't that George Pickens had all this incredible offense. It was just that Surtain kept getting flagged. I think there was 3 flags against him in that game. Just not a clean performance from a guy who prides himself on being a technically sound player. So yeah, this was a situation, and we touched on it earlier, of just great rush and coverage. All of those 7 sacks. A lot of that is Baker Mayfield holding the ball because nobody is open. And you mentioned Riley Moss. I think that's a great success story for this team, right? A guy that you draft, you don't have to play him right away. He's a gunner on special teams, excels at that. And he's out there just competing and making plays. And even I mentioned it earlier, the touchdowns that he's given up to Godwin and then going back to previous weeks. Those are tight window throws where, he really is putting stress on the quarterback to make a perfect play. So, you add in the fact that Justin Simmons was such a huge communicator on the back end, and now Brandon Jones is back there with the green dot in his helmet and communicating with the defense. Or actually Singleton wears the dot. Is that right? I need to remember how this works.
Correct.
Okay, right. But, there's still a lot of communication that goes on the back end. And Jones has done a great job being a newcomer who didn't play in the preseason. So a lot of things clicking for that group. And I think we got to give some props to Jim Leonard, right? The secondary coach who got brought in. It's hard to know exactly how much influence each coach has and how it reflects on the performance of a team. But that's a great secondary, playing with a great secondary coach, a guy that I think Sean Payton wanted as defensive coordinator at one point. I think there's just a lot of things working in their favor.
All right, so we will dive more into the Jets later in the week. That's the Broncos' next opponent. I'm sure people will be talking about whatever the Aaron Rodgers, Sean Payton stuff was from last year. But real quick around the AFC West, Raiders lose to Carolina at home. The Justin Herbert is hurt in LA, and the Chiefs keep winning close games. So Chris, I mean, the AFC West is kind of just doing its thing.
Well, maybe second place is up for grabs, and Broncos fans can be optimistic about that potentially. I mean, the Chiefs are undefeated. Broncos aren't catching the Chiefs. That's obvious. But, the Raiders, that's the Baltimore win turned out to be fool's gold in a hurry right there. And then we'll have to see what happens with the Chargers. Jim Harbaugh is a good coach. I think they'll still have a good season regardless. He'll think of ways to do things and rely on his running attack. But, that was interesting. And you look at the Broncos' upcoming schedule. I mean, They got the Jets this week. I'm sure Sean Payton will not be calling Jarrett Bell of USA Today to stir up anything this week. So we'll see how that one turns out. And then they've got 2 home games coming up against the Raiders and the Chargers, and then they have the Panthers. So I think they need to realistically try to think of winning 3 of the next 4 games. And if they do that, then suddenly they will have a winning record.
Yeah, Kyle, that's interesting that Chris says that. Like, this win kind of, and just the NFL is such a week-to-week league, this kind of changes everything a little bit. And then you see what other teams in the division do. It kind of just changes a little bit. It just mixes everything up a little bit.
Yeah, I don't know. You're right about the week to week thing. I mean, the emotional swings in the NFL are a little ridiculous, but every game matters so much. And that's why, Sundays are so big. So that's the big question, right? Can this Broncos team repeat that Tampa Bay game and use that similar formula throughout the rest of the season? Because when your defense plays that well and creates takeaways, boy, it sets you up to be in such a good position to win football games. The thing I will say, though, is for as good as Bo Nix was in this game, NFL defensive coordinators are going to continue to throw different things at him and try to figure him out and find his weak spots and find his blind spots. Because, I mean, Bo Nix played well, but he's still going to struggle this year, right? Like, we're still going to get on this podcast and say, ooh, hey, he did that wrong, or hey, that was a tough game. To think that, he's just going to kind of fly and ascend to a Pro Bowl, or let's pump the brakes. But there was so much good from this game to build on that there's got to be optimism that this team can continue to, like I said, repeat these games. But we'll see. That Jets game is going to be full of drama. Aaron Rodgers can dissect teams in ways that few quarterbacks can. We saw flashes of that in the first few weeks here. So, we'll see if Riley Moss is going to be looked at as what a great player is, or is kind of the dog in a loss. So a lot of interesting things in this game coming up.
Yeah, Patrick Surtain now gets Garrett Wilson, so he
Yeah.
will have another busy week. All right, guys, thanks for coming on early this morning to break all of this down. Chris, safe travels to West Virginia, where you'll be with the Broncos all week at the Greenbrier, correct?
Yes, well, not staying at the Greenbrier. If I booked a room there, that would
Yeah,
probably put us out of business. But I will be at the lovely Fairfield Inn, 7.6 miles down the road.
So we'll have coverage from that. Make sure to check out all of our Broncos and all other things. Nuggets Media Day is this week already, so that's kicking up. We just had Avs Media Day. Kyle, you went to that. So everything's getting going for that busy fall. So make sure to subscribe to this podcast on Apple or on Spotify. And we will catch back with you guys on Friday to preview the Jets. So thanks for coming on, and we'll talk to you then.